Hello everyone, welcome back to the Crash MotoGP podcast, and we will have a final showdown as Jorge Martin didn't get the title wrapped up in Malaysia, as Pecco Bagnaia gets the gap to 24 points after a sprint DNF, which ultimately looks like it has cost him the world title. We're here to discuss that and more from a really sort of action-packed weekend in Malaysia. I'm joined, of course, by Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. And Pete, you were there in Malaysia for the whole weekend. It was a big Saturday, wasn't it? That's the main point we could start with. It was defining almost for the season. Bagnaia's, was it 8th mistake or DNF, and it just came at the worst possible time, didn't it?
Yeah, as you say, Lewis.
It's all right. Okay.
Been a long weekend. Yeah, it's been one of those weekends. Yeah, it was the whole season sort of compressed, wasn't it, into one day really? I suppose one weekend, but certainly Saturday was a massive Saturday because we started off in the morning, that fantastic pole position by Pecco, where he really just took the fight to Martin, who looked like he had it in the bag, half a second, new lap record, and Pecco dug deep, brings it back, gets the pole, and even Martin was kind of stunned, wasn't he? And so that was the best of Pecco. And then a few sort of hours later, it's a mistake, and it just comes back to that quote that Pecco made earlier in the year. It's been a championship of mistakes, and sadly, it looks like we've still got another round to go, so there's still room for another mistake by somebody. But that certainly looked like a pivotal one, because we were saying before the weekend, weren't we, that Sepang will sort of decide what sort of final round we'll get. Will it be a winner takes all, where they go in sort of almost equal on points, or will it be that one of them has quite a big a points gap, and that was only ever going to be Martin because he had 17 points coming into the weekend. And on paper, Sepang should have favoured Pecco, and I think the race showed that he did have the upper hand on terms of the pace. But it's Martin who leads with another 7 points added to his lead. 24 points. That's a big gap to take into the final round, and of course he can win it in the sprint now. So and he is, as we've seen, he's very strong in the sprints. So it's the weekend is almost the wrong way round for Pecco again. If it was the same points but you had the Grand Prix first, then he might be able to give a bit more pressure onto Martin in the final race. But I think it, as you say, it is sort of it definitely swung. The momentum was swung towards Martin after this weekend.
It did, and good to mention that quali session, because Lewis, it was the two of them were on a different level, and I felt obviously Bagnaia had made everything work so far at that point of the weekend. I think he had topped every session, and then when we get to the sprint, it was just like all that work that Bagnaia had done that just disappeared, and then he goes on after to say, Lewis, that Saturdays are the problem for him. Why do you think that is this year, especially because he wins his 10th Grand Prix, but it's still not going to be enough probably for this world title?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because he tried to explain this at the weekend, but kind of sort of gave non-answers really. He just says he can't really push the same in a sprint as he can in a Grand Prix, which I don't really understand that. I mean, especially this weekend, the tire choice was the same for the sprint and the Grand Prix pretty much for Pecco. So it's an interesting one. As we've seen, there's nothing wrong with these kind of explosiveness over short distances. But as you said, qualifying was brilliant. I mean, it was arguably the best pole position that Pecco Bagnaia has ever done. It is a really, really baffling one, because if you look at the start of the sprint era, it was really Pecco's sprint results that were keeping him in the lead of the championship. You remember the first kind of 6-7 races of last year, he'd had three DNFs already, or 3 non-scores in Grand Prix, but because he was so competitive in the sprints, that's what helped him. And then from the second half of last year, it flipped. Martin was the sprint guy. Pecco went between Austria last year and where was it, Assen this year for his first sprint win or something like that. So yeah, it is quite a hard one to fathom really, and I don't really think Pecco really knows either. They're half distance races, but a race is a race. We saw at the start of the Grand Prix again. Nothing wrong with the that kind of initial kind of insistency from Pecco when it came to fighting Martin. So it is something he's going to have to clear up in his game, because Martin is 24 points in the lead by virtue of just being bulletproof, relentlessly consistent. He's won 3 Grand Prix. Yeah, okay, that's 7 less than Pecco, but makes no difference. If you're there every weekend, if your championship rivals making mistakes and you're just banking the best results, that's what's going to do it. And looking ahead to next year, obviously there's still a lot of things to line up, but with, we're kind of expecting Marc Marquez on a factory Ducati to be back to his kind of old level. You remember the last time that Marquez won a championship, and it was the thing that won him that was relentless consistency. Not only was he winning Grand Prix hand over fist, he was also on the podium on every other race pretty much that he wasn't winning a Grand Prix. Pecco really needs to tighten that up, because it will probably cost him the championship this year and could potentially stop him from being champion in future.
Yeah, it's strange for me because he talked about it a little bit, about the feeling that he has with the bike. I don't know if it's because there's less fuel in the bike at the start, or it's so different from Bagnaia compared to the Grand Prix. It's like he almost loves having the bike with the full fuel tank, and he knows where he can brake better. He seemed to say, Pete, that he struggled almost when he's behind in a sprint, like when he's trying to get past someone or get close. He just can't really judge. Has the same feeling that he does on the brakes and stuff. It's odd, isn't it?
As you guys say, for the reasons that you guys give, which is that we see early in the race on Sunday how great he was in that battle. But certainly there must be some sort of difference in the setup, apart from the lower fuel and everything else, and maybe I don't know the engine maps. I don't know, something that feels different for him, and he's not able to or he doesn't feel comfortable at least. And it's certainly. At this level, with the two of them so strong, any sort of chink in the armor is going to be exploited by the other, isn't it? And that's really what Martin's doing at the moment. And it's well, here we are. We're going down to the final round now, a new final round. But it's a shame that unfortunately it's come down to a mistake, I think. But in some ways, that's sort of been the character of the season. As you guys said, it was eight non-scores. But then there's also been a few races where there's 1 point scored or 2 points scored, where he sort of got back on the bike or whatever, and so it's actually even more sort of incidents, if you like, in the races than just the zeros show. I think he said something, didn't he, about I hold the record now for 10 wins in a season and not leading the championship, because it's I mean, to win that many races and not to be leading the championship is really, really exceptional.
Yeah, it will come on to that battle actually for the Grand Prix now, Lewis. I mean, for 3 laps, it was, I counted, I went back yesterday, 13 times they swapped the lead. It was, it's quite ironic when you hear they say they can't really overtake a MotoGP, and there was no issue there at all, was there? It was really nice to see, but, Bagnaia, I think, could have kept that going a bit longer in the race, but he just decided that, I'll just go up the road and maybe try and force Martin into a mistake. Didn't happen, but it was nice to see a bit of a battle between them at least, wasn't it?
Yeah, finally, it's only taken 19 rounds. We've seen very, very brief flashpoints between the two of them in Grand Prix and races this year. And not really had that proper duel, and this was great. This was racing at its best. It shows what can be done in these bikes if you have two riders willing to absolutely risk every single thing, and that was what we saw. They were not really in control. Martin was going wide, Pecco was picking back. They were picking all sorts, because it was kind of a bit of a catch-22 for both, because Pecco really needed Martin to make a mistake. The only way to get him to do that is to kind of get him riled up a bit. Martin knows that if he makes a mistake, well, that's fine. If Pecco makes mistakes, even better. So they kind of had nothing to lose, really, and we got some great action out of it. And I think afterwards we saw, Pecco obviously had the pace to pull away. Martin didn't need to do anything else after that. Marquez crashing really did him wonders. Bastianini just really wasn't at the races, and this is the two of them touched on this. We've seen this kind of over the last sort of second half of the season, really, is that we have gotten to a point where Pecco and Martin are just so much of a step ahead of the rest that a worst case scenario is second, and if you're Martin's earned that position. If we look at his results over the year and the consistency, he's earned that right to finish second, and we know if Pecco wins the final 2 races and Martin's right behind him, Martin's still the champion. So again, I think that's the kind of conclusion to that scrap was very much indicative of Martin's done the hard work and making sure his results have been consistent, and he's earned that right to, give himself that safety net.
Yeah, it was I was so impressed by Martin because, in that position, and I think he kind of mentioned it, Pete, but he needs to kind of just be on it to be like, not even have a worry about crashing, because like he needs to be in that zone, because if he starts to relax, he feels way worse. And like we've seen that in Thailand, for example, where he was thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? I feel nervous with the front, and he seen Marquez crashing, that just switched him back on, sort of thing. But then when he started attacking Bagnaia, and by the way, Marquez had the best seat in the house for that one. He was just sitting hoping that, happy days, could end up with a race win here if it all goes wrong. But it was a turning point, I think, with Martin, because he was just like showing Bagnaia, I'm here to fight, and you're not going to just bully me, sort of thing. It was a really good sort of show of the two riders, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Bagnaia, it sort of put himself in this must-win situation, and after the mistake on the Saturday, so we all knew that he had to go for it, even at the risk of falling, a bit like in Thailand the previous week, wasn't it? Where he just had to go for the victory. He couldn't afford to lose any more points. And you got Martin, who's quite clear about, well, hang on, if I can take the lead here, knowing what MotoGP is like now, with, all the hot air, everything on the guy behind, it's all about those first few laps, isn't it? And that's also why it was such a great battle early on, because they knew this was going to decide the victory. Whoever could establish a bit of a lead for a lap or two was pretty much game over, wasn't it? At least if all things were normal. I suppose we can come on to that later as far as the tactics and everything, but that would be the normal, these sort of back to front races that we get now, where everything happens in the first few laps and then it's sort of static. So they're both desperate, the title's on the line, they've both got, as Lewis has explained, they can both lose, they can both win. Pecco can't afford to crash, but then if Martin crashes, he wipes out this advantage that he's built up all the time. But if they both crash, that's good for Martin. So it was kind of balanced, wasn't it? It was balanced in that sense. So they did give each other just enough room, didn't they? And I think that also added to the battle, because there was nothing dirty in it, but they were clearly just throwing everything they could at it. And as you say, Jordan, I think for Martin, that's his best way of dealing with the pressure, isn't it? Is just to focus on the immediate battle and focus on winning the race. And then even though Pecco had got the upper hand, having Pecco that little bit ahead of him to look at, to follow during the race, was almost perfect, wasn't it? It was just the right distance. Pecco was too far ahead to be putting the dirty air on him, but it was also something to focus on, concentrate on. And I know he ran wide a little bit towards the end, didn't he? But it wasn't a sort of a major moment. And after that, it was very much just settled for second. But, second was all he needed. And it was a classic case of, Pecco won the battle, but Martin, going to win the war at this rate.
Yep. Lewis, any take on it?
Yeah, but they spoke afterwards about, we've got a lot of respect for each other, and I think we saw that in the race, but I think that is kind of to Pecco's detriment. You think about how Bastianini won the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, really hard, move, put Martin in a position where, you're going to either have to run off or you're going to crash, and there was a lot of questions asked of Bagnaia of, why didn't you slow the pace? Riders surprised you didn't slow the pace, try and bring more riders into it. And, Pecco, a sign of we know he's a good guy, he's got a good head on his shoulders, and we saw that especially with how he talked about the Valencia situation this weekend. But I think that's part of maybe the problem Pecco's faced this year, and perhaps as well in the sprints, is he seems to lack that kind of ruthless kind of killer instinct that someone like Martin has, people like Marc Marquez does. There was opportunities where Pecco could have put up the upside, maybe just disrupted Martin in a way that wasn't dirty or anything like that, brought Marquez into it. Just I think when the season's over, Ducati need to sit down with Pecco and have a word with him about his tactics and go, look, if you're in this position, make it a bit harder. Don't just, you don't have to do everything by the book. There's quite a considerable grey area there when it comes to what you can get away with in racing. And going back to Emilia-Romagna, Martin spoke about, okay, well, if this is the line now, then that's the line. Test it. There's a clear precedent there. If something happens, they put it under investigation. You can go to the stewards room and go, you didn't penalise this, so you can't penalise that. When you're in a position where you're behind and you've got nothing to lose, you need to start testing the waters, you need to start testing the grey areas. And I think, that's one thing I would like to see from Pecco in this last round. You know, if it happens, wherever it's going to be, is, you know, really, really get the elbows out. He's talked about, I'm going to, you know, try and tow people, get them up the grid, blah, 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 blah. Get your elbows out, you know, put Martin in positions where he has to, you know, back out or crash. You know, that's racing. And yeah, I think Pecco now needs to just, turn up the aggression levels.
I think it was a good show even last year, just from memory. Martin wasn't afraid, Pete, to kind of rough Bagnaia up, especially the final few rounds. Seen it, I think of back as the Qatar sprint, was there a bit of contact at the start there? And then you just think, when we got to Valencia, even in qualifying and practice, he was being a nuisance around him. He was making him feel a bit uncomfortable. And I don't know if Bagnaia's going to do that, because he said this weekend he's not that type of person. He's not the type of rider. But as we said before, you just have to kind of do something. Like Jorge Lorenzo tried it in 2013 with Marquez. Didn't work in the end, but at least he could say, I tried something. And I thought it was a bit sort of cheeky of Bagnaia on Saturday to say that he was expecting Bastianini and Marquez to find something. I mean, I'm sorry. Does he know? And it was a conversation that him and Marquez had. He's like, oh, your bike's slow here. And Marquez is like, well, yeah, I know. Like, he was clearly pushing so much the weekend to even stay with the top two. It was a bit sort of like, I found it a bit, what can that GP23 realistically do? It's already at its limit. He needed to slow it down, I think, and it's just a bit of a shame we didn't see that side from him. Do you think that's fair?
Well, that's it. I mean, as you say, what Pecco's talking about, raising Mark and Bagnaia, but the easier option is just to slow himself and Martin down, isn't it? I mean, it achieves the same thing, and it's a much, you would argue, easier thing to do, because as you say, Marquez would be like, well, hang on, I'm riding on the edge here on a year-old bike. There's nothing left. You know, the race could have gone after about, I don't know, 5 or 6 laps. Once Pecco had taken the lead, he was in the lead for a couple of laps. That was the moment where, for me, it could have gone either of two ways.
Yes.
It could have been the normal race that really we saw, where Pecco just escapes into the distance, or that was the moment when you, excuse me, could have done the go slow thing a bit. Pecco didn't choose to do that, as we saw. He went as quick as he could, and explained afterwards why. As you said, Jordan, you know, it's not his thing to sort of go slow, but I think, you know, it would have been possible there, wouldn't it? It would have been interesting to see if he just sort of eased off a bit in the faster parts of the track. Lewis has explained that in the rules, there's nothing against doing that kind of thing. The rules just say, they cover all of these things. It's just, you've got to ride, you can't cause danger. You know, that's the thing. You've got to ride in a responsible manner that doesn't cause danger. There's nothing that says you must ride at 100% every moment you're on the racetrack, because obviously that would be impossible to manage and to police and everything else. So you just have to not cause danger. There's nothing in the rules against slowing your pace down, riding tactically. You gave the example of Jorge Lorenzo and, you know, even Danny Pedrosa, I remember, I think, after that race, and he was the guy who was sort of sent to break the siege, wasn't he? He was the guy that, as Marquez's teammate, who was trying to get past Lorenzo and sort of win the race, take the maximum points from Lorenzo, and Lorenzo was putting on some savage passes, wasn't he, to stop Danny from staying in the lead. But afterwards, Pedrosa was, hey, I fully understand this. And I think he even said, I don't know why he didn't do these tactics earlier, as in a previous race. Why wait until the last race to do this? So it is a part of racing. We've seen it in multiple classes. Pecco says he doesn't want to do it. He's a principled guy. We saw that, as Lewis said, about the Valencia race. We'll see what happens at Barcelona, but certainly, you know, as you're saying, you can raise the guys up. He's talking about giving people a tow, but really, you know, the trouble that he's got is that he and Martin are on such a different level that it's going to be very difficult. And I did try and ask Mark about, you know, did you think he might slow people down? And he dodged the question a bit by talking about the gap at the end of the race. And I think in the press conference, they also said, well, it was a 10-second gap or something to Bastianini, but it wouldn't have been the end of the race where you did it. You would have had to do it near the beginning, because that's where everyone's together, isn't it? So if you're going to do it, it would have been then. He chose not to do it and explain why, but, you know, let's see what happens in the final round. I mean, it's now or never, really, isn't it, as far as the championship? So, you know, let's see what happens.
It just reminds me, I don't want to go to F1, but I remember 2016 when it was Lewis Hamilton versus Nico Rosberg, and that final round in Abu Dhabi, Hamilton was slowing. I mean, it was pedestrian at sometimes. There was a group of 4. It was Hamilton, Vettel, Verstappen, and Rosberg. And Rosberg was slammed in the middle of it, and he was panicking because he seen Hamilton slowing them down. It was bringing the other cars in. It was getting really tense. And that's what I think needs to happen for Bagnaia. No one will judge him for it. I think it's if you want this championship, try something, because anything is possible in motorsport. It can change things. And even going back to Abu Dhabi 21, we've seen Sergio Perez slowing down Lewis Hamilton for his team. Obviously, we're not going to get that with Enea Bastianini, because I don't think, I mean, Enea said that he'll maybe help him, but, you know, it's that type of, it's different in a sense, but this is what Ducati are probably going to try and say to Bagnaia. If you want to try and get this title, try something to him. Try and force him into a mistake. Make him nervous. But yeah, it will be an interesting thing if it happens, but I can't see it in Barcelona just because Bagnaia stuck to his guns on his comments about being not that type of rider. And I think maybe he'll just try and win it the way he wants to win it, which ultimately might not give him the title, but who knows. And just to talk about the race, it was red flagged yesterday. Lewis, the first lap, a horrific incident with Jack Miller. It was Fabio Quartararo was caught up, and Brad Binder. Thankfully, everyone is okay. But when you seen the initial replays, it was so frightening the way Jack Miller's head got caught in the rear of the Yamaha, and you see in the slow-mo the way the helmet twisted. It didn't look good, did it? But miraculously, Jack was walking back down pit lane just as the restart was about to happen, which was the best thing possible.
Yeah, you know, they make him tough in Townsville for sure. Yeah, it was a nasty accident, and kind of one of those unavoidable ones in motorcycle racing. Really, you know, Brad Binder tagged a bike in front of him, sat up, went into Quartararo, and Quartararo had Miller on his inside. Miller was really the unwitting sort of victim there, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, testament to, you know, Alpine Stars leathers and all of the technology now they have to keep them safe, because yeah, that could have been a nasty accident. You know, it doesn't need to be a conversation about, you know, those first couple of corners at Sepang. There's, you know, we do see it at some circuits where you have these sort of choke points at the start of the races for bike racing, that, you know, that's where the real nasty accidents happen. You know, Barcelona turn 1 is always a good kind of example as that as well. So yeah, you know, as I think the stewards deemed it a racing incident quite rightly. But yeah, we just glad to see Jack was all right. Glad to see everyone was all right. You know, and yeah, I mean, you know, there's not really a lot you can do at the start of the races. Was this maybe a thing of, are people maybe taking a bit more risk? Because, you know, at Sepang especially, we heard a lot of riders this weekend talking about, as soon as you get behind a rider, the bike becomes terrible. You know, the heat makes the tires go up, the aero doesn't work. You know, is that, you know, would we have seen Jack making such an aggressive kind of, you know, trying to jump as many people as he was with such an extreme inside line? Had overtaken been a bit more easier? Really impossible to say, but yeah, the main thing is that Jack's all right, and we'll hopefully see him. He'll be a bit bruised, I'd have thought, but we'll hopefully see him on the bike for his last KTM race at the final round.
Yeah, and let's hope that he is there. And as we've talked about, you've probably heard us mention, Barcelona is set to be announced as the replacement for Valencia, which in principle it probably makes sense logistically for Dorna and stuff, and keeping it in Spain. But then there's a few things, Pete, that have been raised about that. You know, Enea Bastianini, for example, doesn't think it's right that MotoGP should race in Spain. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we're waiting to hear what the governments have to say to give green lights. It's a real collaborative effort here just to try and judge the mood and to confirm things, because it is next week the race is scheduled for, so there's not much time, is there?
No, definitely not. Yeah. I mean, the rumor mill over the season finale was just sort of going off the scale all weekend, really. And initially it looked like, I mean, it is. Dorna are in a difficult position in that they have a contract to hold a MotoGP race in Valencia, and they're kind of waiting on the Valencia government to say, well, no, we don't want it, we can't hold it, it's not appropriate, whatever. But obviously they've got much bigger priorities at the moment than deciding on a MotoGP race. So, and at the same time, the clock's ticking, as you say, John. You know, we're a week away and everything else. So the riders clearly were all, I think, unanimously uncomfortable with racing at Valencia, and you know, I think they made their feelings known in the safety commission. We don't know what goes on in the safety commission. That's the idea that the riders can speak in confidence. There's no official, record of what is said and everything else. But certainly after that meeting, suddenly the rumours came out that it wouldn't be going to Valencia. And it would, and then sort of Qatar, that had always sort of been there as a rumor, was mentioned, or another Spanish round, and Portimao seemed to be the other one. The staying at Sepang, that was a bit of an option earlier in the weekend, it seemed, but then sort of the reality of not having enough tyres and people already being on the road for 7 weeks. A lot of the teams that's how long they've been. They didn't go back to Europe during the 1 weekend off between these 2 sets of flyways, so they've literally been on the road for 7 weeks. So they're all pretty exhausted, and I think they were all sort of looking forward to getting back home as well and having at least 1 weekend off before a season finale. So, then come Sunday morning, the Barcelona sort of rumours really gathered pace. And as you say, not completely confirmed. There's still things to be worked out and everything else, and how that's going to work. You mentioned that Bastianini wasn't comfortable with it. I know Augusto Fernandez, when I asked him earlier in the weekend, also didn't think anywhere in Spain would be sort of appropriate. It's not holding the race, or not just holding the race. It's also the fact that the season finale is it's kind of a party, isn't it? It's got that sort of atmosphere. That's the bit that people are a little bit uncomfortable with, and so having it outside of Spain and Qatar has the flexibility as far as the weather, isn't it? And maybe that's another conversation for another time. Is does this Valencia, having the finale in Valencia, it kind of it forces a certain date on the calendar, because the later you're going, it's already late, isn't it? Weather-wise, when we have it. And you look at Formula One and these other championships, they start with the flyaways, if you like, and they finish with the flyaways, and that gives you more room, doesn't it? But if you're going to have a race in Europe, it's really late to do that. And but anyway, Barcelona has been chosen, as you say. We'll see if it's confirmed. I think it's supposed to be within the next few days that they hope to have everything official.
Yeah.
It'll be, I guess, very much for Valencia. We don't know exactly what's planned, but the riders certainly feel that's the angle, and I think Dawn as well. That's the angle that the event should take. But we've got to see on exactly how it's going to work and everything else. And it will be all the classes, I suppose. We should say that as well. And I think the plan is also for the post-season test to be on the Tuesday after the race, which is as it says in the rules. It doesn't actually name a circuit, but it says, an official test on the Tuesday after the final round at the same venue. So if they stick to the rules, it will be at Barcelona. And then there'll be private testing at Jerez, actually, by the concession teams as well. So, yeah, it's going to be a busy end of the year. But as things stand now, it's the same date as Valencia would have been. But, watch this space, I suppose, for the details.
Yeah, like Pete says, nothing confirmed as of recording today on Monday morning, but should be in the next 24, 48 hours that we get something official. And there's just to talk about the riders over the weekend. I was so impressed with how they commented on things, the way they were expressive about sympathy towards people of Valencia. A real shining light for me. I thought it was, I'm really, really proud, actually, just as a fan of MotoGP as well. Just to see them come out and be so human was really impressive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's we often have this kind of debate amongst people of you need sports should be kept isolated, keep politics out of sport, blah blah blah. The reality is that the real world, sport exists within the real world. We are, for a long time, I think, motor racing in particular kind of existed inside this bubble. You went into a paddock, everything that happened outside the paddock didn't really matter. COVID pandemic comes along, and I think that changed things, and I think it's really brought around a change in perspective. We've seen it for a lot of things over the past few years when there's been, there was a flooding in Emilia-Romagna last year, and we saw, a lot of the riders really put their best foot forward and show their human side, and we need to see more of that, I think, in general. We race in a world championship. I can't remember what rider said it, but they made a great quote that we live under the same sky.
It was Bagnaia.
So the riders are certainly more aware of what's going on around them now, and that's good. And I think the kind of, it wasn't so much a boycott, but a lot of them saying, look, we shouldn't be racing in Valencia, really kind of reminded me when a lot of the Formula One drivers were like, look, we're not going to be racing in Russia. I won't be racing in Russia this year if we go, a few years ago when that invasion of Ukraine happened. So yeah, it's good for MotoGP. If there is a final round in Valencia and Barcelona, then obviously the riders will really, I think, do a good job at uniting. A lot of them have already said they're going to be donating win bonuses and such.
Yeah.
You know, the ethical thing about whether we should be racing in Spain or not, it is a question, and I think that'll be the stumbling block for this race going ahead. The Carlos Ezpeleta said on Sunday that, you know, they've requested to the Catalan government to have this race, but they need to discuss it with the national government in Spain and also with the Valencia government to kind of align on, you know, messaging and just align on beliefs, because ultimately if the Valencia government and the Valencia people and also with the wider Spanish government go, look, we don't think a celebration of this championship, you know, so close to tragedy is a very good idea. You know, the MotoGP will have to respect that, and I kind of look at it from the perspective of a flood victim. If you've lost your home, if your livelihood's gone, if you've lost family members, if you're out there trying to pick up the pieces of your life, you know, help clearing the streets, helping people, you know, I don't want to put, you know, a downer on the podcast, but they are still finding, you know, more and more dead bodies, you know, in the wake of this. Are you going to look to this celebration, you know, what is being billed as a kind of a celebration and a support event for you that favourably right now, when these riders will go do their job, make millions of euros, and then go home to their nice houses without, you know, some of them probably, you know, will never go not go near Valencia until next year's race and not really see what's going on there. So, yeah, you know, there does need to be this kind of outlook to it as well, that if we do go to Barcelona, we are going to have to kind of accept that no matter how much, you know, how much MotoGP does for the people of Valencia, it is still going to be a very uncomfortable event. And you know, winning a world championship, you're crowned world champion, your thoughts aren't going to be with what's going on about the world. Your thoughts are going to be on yourself. And yeah, I agree with the riders who say we shouldn't be in Spain.
Yeah, it was really good to hear their perspectives on things, because, you know, it was just it's such a difficult moment for especially the Spanish riders, I think, too, and especially Jorge Martin, thinking about that. You know, he could arguably have the biggest weekend of his life in his career, and he just has to think about the country, and it's a difficult position for the riders to be put in. And like I say, with Augusto Fernandez and Enea Bastianini, I really respected how they talked about it, and it was good to hear the perspectives of every rider. But as you both mentioned, it will be a race for Valencia if it goes ahead, and it will be a sort of show to them that the support that MotoGP could give. Yes, it's Marc Marquez said that, yeah, my podium was for Valencia, but it doesn't really mean anything to them, but I want them to show my support. That's what they can do on track to try and, you know, they feel that's their way of supporting it. And like you say, with win bonuses being donated, and also will mention there's a fund page that's set up by the Aspar team who are based in Valencia. I'll put the link in the podcast description on Spotify, Apple, and in the YouTube description as well if you want to donate to that, because yeah, a very emotional weekend for them. And of course, with David Alonso winning in Moto3 too, he's, for such a young age, to speak about how he couldn't really think about anything else other than Valencia and just wanting to ride around and get back home, to just because I think he believe he lives close to Valencia, or he lives on the outskirts. And yeah, a real tough time for the Aspar team. And like I say, I'll put the description or the link in the description for that fund if you want to donate. And yeah, like I say, we've nothing yet that's confirmed at the time of recording, but it looks like it will be Barcelona for the final round. And that's pretty much it, gents, for the weekend. I suppose, Pete, we could talk about one person, Andrea Iannone, just how his weekend went. He said yesterday, I think, I've listening to his debrief, obviously you were there, but he sounded shattered, to be honest. A fairly weekend that I expected. He didn't really, he impressed in qualifying and in practice, but the Grand Prix and the sprint really took a toll on him. He was so physically shot at, it sounded, from what he said. And he had a little cheeky comment as well towards Alvaro Bautista which Alvaro Bautista, if you want to go and look on his Twitter, has responded in Spanish, so it's quite interesting there, a bit of needle. So yeah, Iannone was back in the paddock, and he was getting up to no good again.
Yeah, he was all smiles when he came back. He was very it was a different Iannone, I suppose you could say, from the one that left, who maybe took himself a bit more seriously. But yeah, he was just loving being back, and but and then as he sort of tried to stress over the weekend, just the reality of riding these modern MotoGP bikes just physically destroyed him. The upper body, the braking, he just could not. As he said, the limit isn't the tyres, the limit is Andrea. It was how he sort of said, wasn't it? I think on the Saturday. And he spoke about, I can do 5 laps like a king, or I can do, get to the end of the race. It was that sort of situation. It was quite surprising, that there's somebody who clearly he's obviously still a very fit person. He's still racing full time in World Superbike. That was emphasized just how different it is, how physically different. I think he compared World Superbike, the physical effort, to like riding a bicycle, didn't he? I mean, as far as leaning the bike over because of the lack of aero and the braking and everything else. But certainly he showed the speed was still there. I mean, there was a point in qualifying, he was following Bezzecchi, his teammate, and actually if he hadn't run wide on that final corner, he might even have outpaced him. So it was impressive, given that he hadn't done any testing. The speed is clearly still there. He's obviously still a very talented rider, as I think we all knew. But certainly, by Sunday evening, he looked pretty worn out by it all. And he didn't want to say if he's going to be on the bike for the finale. That still seems to be a little bit up in the air. I think VR46 would like to keep him on there, but you also got the Ducati and Pirro as their test rider, and thinking ahead to next year, and they've got a lack of sort of testing anyway, haven't they, with the concessions Ducati? So if they could give Pirro maybe the chance of a Grand Prix weekend, they could almost start their testing early, couldn't they? Ahead of the post-race test, assuming that goes ahead and everything else. So you're not quite certain that he'll be back on the bike, and what can he do in 2 weeks? He can't really completely change his sort of physical condition in 2 weeks. But yeah, it was. I think a lot of the other riders, it was quite interesting. The other Italian riders, the VR46 guys, they were sort of quite excited to have Iannone back on the grid as well, because a lot of them they watched him. I think Bezzecchi was saying they watched him race on TV. They'd never actually sharing the pit garage with him. So. It was interesting. So let's see if he's back for another one. But the speed is still there. But it does make you wonder, what if this big 5 years that obviously he lost, and what he could have made of his career without that. So. Yeah,
Lewis, any thoughts on his weekend?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it beforehand, and we kind of was like, where do you think we'll finish? And he was around about, I'd no offense to Lorenzo Savadori, but had Savadori not been there, then he's lasted every race. I wrote before the weekend as well, like it wouldn't really be fair to expect anything else, because he's been off the bike for so long, and Sepang's physical, and the whole point wasn't really to go and particularly do anything. It was Valentino wanted to give Iannone just to give Iannone something back, and and that's fair enough. The qualifying lap was definitely intriguing, and as Pete says, what if? I mean, looking at the way things were going already in 2019, and you remember at the start of 2020 that the two Aprilia riders, Iannone and Espargaro, actually fell out quite hard because Iannone took a lot of undue credit for bike development, and Leish was very, very unhappy. Happened at the team launch, I think, in Qatar, which was of all the times for that to happen. You're kind of still looking at a situation that even, without the ban and things like that, Iannone probably wasn't still going to be on the grid in 2024. So yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it? Because we know how quick Iannone is, or was, and still is, and he should probably have more than the one MotoGP win that he has, but it just this frustrating character that kind of focused a bit too much on his vanity, and as Pete says, maybe took himself a bit too seriously. And I think that there is an argument to be made. There's probably maybe a bit more to Iannone than everyone is probably aware of, and perhaps with a better surrounding and maybe a bit of proper help, than we might have had a better a better version of that rider during his time in MotoGP. But as it is, it seems, the way life has gone for him, it's kind of, made him a bit more well-rounded, and the way he was speaking to the press was a lot more human than it used to be. I'm sure Pete remembers when he used to speak to Iannone when he was racing. You would get 2-3 word answers. You'd if it was difficult, he would really just not treat anyone particularly well. He wouldn't. Yeah, no, it's a different story, and it's a shame it took what it took for him to kind of sort of really become the rider that he should have been, because had he been the way he was this weekend throughout his career, coupled with that speed, coupled with that kind of feisty character, would have been massive for MotoGP. But as it is, he's just one of those what ifs, and yeah, that's it.
I think every sport has that type of character, and I think is definitely one of motorcycle racing's characters. I think if he ever releases a book, it would be a bestseller. I think honestly, I think he has a lot more, as you say, Lewis. There's a lot more to Iannone than just what we see. And I think, yeah, it was it was kind of nice to see him back in MotoGP for me when I seen him on track. It didn't look out of place. It looked like he had just been there all along, sort of thing. He just looked like how he always looked, and it was like, yeah, just to see someone that, as you said, the Italian riders mentioned, they watched him on TV and then they're sharing the box with him. Kind of similar for me seeing him there. I was like, oh yeah, there's Iannone again. It's like it's kind of cool, but yeah, he's definitely a character that he's definitely changed a lot over the years. So he has. Anything else, Pete, from the weekend that was quite interesting from anyone that you heard, or anything you heard in the paddock?
So I think Augusto Fernandez still seems to be heading towards that Yamaha testing deal that's gone a little bit quiet. Obviously been rumoured for a long time. So yeah, he's sort of hoping to get onto that at some stage, that bike before the end of the year. Exactly. I mean, everything's a bit up in the air with this season finale, but it sounded like it wouldn't be the post-race test anyway. Taka Nakagami, if we're talking about guys going into testing roles as well, he won't be testing at, let's say, Barcelona if it goes ahead at the post-race test there, but he will be there very much to help Chantra. So that will be his aim, and sort of make that transition from full-time rider into sort of the test team and everything. But that will be his main goal at the test. So he will be there, but he'll be just there to sort of support Chantra, help him, give him any advice he can, and then start this new testing role. So yeah, that was really the main thing there. A few people saying, obviously, if Barcelona is the test track, maybe it's a good thing for the Japanese brands because it's so slippery, as you guys have already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of their big problems is still the traction, isn't it? So it might be actually a better venue for them than Valencia as far as working on their bikes for next year during the testing. And the race weekend, really, they can almost, because with the concessions, it's always a continuous, there's no sort of new bike that suddenly gets pulled out as there is for the others, is there? It sort of just gets changed as it goes along. Yamaha obviously had a new engine, which didn't last long for Quartararo, unfortunately. But the electronics, it seemed, made quite a big step. They put a lot more into the hands of the riders, it seems, and that worked out pretty well for them. And it was a good weekend, wasn't it, for both of the Yamaha guys? One of their best weekends.
Yeah.
So maybe they found a direction there with the electronics. But we see these things sometimes where, at one event you can have a good weekend and you think things are going well, and then the next race turns around. So let's see what they do at the final round if that goes ahead.
Yeah, just an interesting stat. It was the first time a Japanese bike has finished as top non-Ducati this year. So yeah, that just shows you the progress. So I think Yamaha have made more than Honda. Yeah, a good point about Quartararo. Actually said it yesterday about the if it is Barcelona, it will suit them massively for testing. And I think that's what they want, to try and understand more about that bike and get it in a better window for 25. And that's really it. We'll be back next week for hopefully our preview for the last round. Like I say, nothing officially confirmed yet, but it looks like it will be Barcelona. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching, if you're listening, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, and you'll never miss an episode. Until then, we'll see you next time.